Buckeye Talk coming to you from the Woody Hayes Athletics Center. Ohio State getting ready to play Maryland on Saturday. Nathan Baird from cleveland.com with Stephen Means and Doug Lesmerises. We just talked to Ryan Day and a handful of players, getting some questions, obviously, about the Terrapins. I feel like the anticipation of this game has changed a little bit in the past 4 or 5 days. We thought that Maryland, they were off to a 4-0 start. They have an intriguing quarterback in Talia Tagovailoa. They got a couple really good receiver talents. Mike Locksley has done a good job, going nationally, bringing in some talented guys. And then they go out and just get boat raced at home by Iowa, 51-14. And now the question is this actually a team that can threaten or challenge Ohio State, or is it just another Big Ten team that Ohio State can kind of plow through on the way to playing the tougher teams later on? I guess, Stephen, Ryan Day today was talking about how you kind of have to just throw out the Iowa game and focus more on what he called a dangerous team in Maryland before that. Do you still think that this is a team that has the kind of talent? We should also say Dante Demas Jr., Maryland's best receiver, is out for the year now. That was an injury that happened in that game. Can Maryland threaten this team in some way? And does Ohio State's defense maybe need to be pushed more before we can say that these progressions that they've made are legitimate?
Yeah, I don't think that they're a threat to beat Ohio State. I think this is interesting because if you're going to throw out anything, maybe you throw out Akron altogether, obviously, and then to a distinct, you take Rutgers with a grain of salt a little bit. I think this is a good for a defense that's maybe made some changes over the last couple of weeks here. This is true validation of whether or not it works, because this is the first team that they're going to play since making those changes that can do some explosive things offensively. Even with Demas out, they still got Raheem Jarrett, who was a former 5-star wide receiver, who's coming into his own there. Talia can make some plays on his own, both with his arm and with his leg. So this is the first team from a play calling standpoint, but also just what they have at quarterback and what they have at wide receiver, who can expose Ohio State. And we're going to be able to answer the question, is what Ohio State did the last 2 weeks real or not, even if it's not the perfect version of it.
We were asking a lot of these questions last year going into that Maryland game that ended up not happening. That was a game that got canceled last year. So Ohio State hasn't seen Talia Tagovailoa in person yet. He's been sort of selectively mobile in his career. He had one game last year against Minnesota, ran for a bunch of yards and a couple touchdowns, but most of the time that's not really his thing. Doug, as you've sort of been assessing the progress of this Ohio State defense, haven't you been looking forward to when they would face another quarterback? And do you think that threat could be there at all on Saturday?
I mean, listen, man, in the Big Ten, you're looking for any quarterback. So it's like, does that quarterback have a pulse? Tagovailoa has a pulse, right? So I think for you, Ohio State fan, I would throw out the Iowa game. Because first of all, Ohio State's defense is not as good as Iowa's. So that's a start. And then the other thing is, I think Maryland, they're 4-0. They're at home in prime time on a Friday night. I do think these teams trying to take a step up. A lot of times they're not used to big games and the pressure gets to them. So I think that happened. I think that, Mike Locksley, watching that broadcast was like talking before the game, like they really thought they had a shot. And as you said, they didn't. So now the pressure's off a little bit. And actually, I think a team like Maryland, sometimes you'd rather go on the road than be at home with all these expectations. So I do think, now listen, Demas, that's a huge loss. Yeah. He's like 500 receiving yards plus in 5 games. I mean, he's a huge loss. But I think psychologically, game plan-wise, they'll be better. I think they'll be much better than they were against Iowa. And so then you have to remember that in the first 4 games, Tagovailoa had 10 touchdown passes and 1 pick. Last week he had 2 touchdown passes and 5 picks. And he threw for 332, 274, 350, and 384 in the first 4 games before he threw for 157 against Iowa. And the other thing is, Ohio State's defense is not as good as Iowa's. So normally with Ohio State, it's like, well, if that Big Ten team could do this, well, certainly Ohio State can. That is not the case with Iowa's defense this year. So to Stephen's point, Maryland's not going to come here and win, but I think it's a real passing game, which in the Big Ten is like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, let's not forget, it was just a couple weeks ago that Tulsa came in here and threw the ball around really well on Ohio State. And that seems like a long time ago because Ohio State has outscored the 2 opponents since then by so much, but it wasn't that long ago. And it's a lot of the same guys on the field. I think a progression is happening, but I think this is a kind of week where I think Maryland can challenge Ohio State as well as Tulsa did, I would expect, on offense. And Ohio State's going to have to make some adjustments, and Ohio State's going to have to maybe prove how much it has grown since then. I think it could be a big week too, just because if you get a challenge this week and pass it, or even if you don't, if you don't look that great, you're going to learn a lot, and then you've got a bye week and you've got another week of preparation before you go up against Indiana. Just it's a good juncture of the season for them to potentially get another test that they can learn from and take into the second 6 games of this season. Get the text, 614-350-3315. We'll be back here on Wednesday night talking to a host of Ohio State players about what they've done so far this season and what they're expecting from the Maryland game on Saturday.